Welcome to Decoding Retirement. Hi, I'm your host, Bob Powell, and today we're going to go behind the headlines with Lazetta Rainey Braxton, the founder of the Real Wealth Coterie. Lazetta, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. It's great being here with you.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. And I want to do a deep dive into a topic that you care deeply about, which is the wealth gap that exists between men and women. Let's start with sort of an overview of what people need to know about what this wealth gap looks like.
Yeah, so there's a statistics that has been pretty much at the same pace, and that is that Black women earn 62 cents on the dollar for every dollar a white man earns. And for women, that number in general for white women is 83 cents. And so if you want to talk about gaps when it comes to wealth, you have to start with the income disparities.
Yeah.
Most of us, earn our wealth based on our human capital. That's what we bring to our workplace as entrepreneurs or as employees. And if we are not getting the funding, the compensation, how can we keep up with trying to fund our own wealth portfolio?
Right. So in terms of human capital, the notion is it's been, espoused by Nobel Prize winners like Modigliani and others that human capital is sort of the net present value of your stream of earnings from your employer, and that the best way to increase your human capital is by investing in your education. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. It's one of the very important elements, the education piece. I would also say it is your ability to have the opportunity to put your education and your craft to work.
Right.
I love the parallel that you said about the future value, right, of your current earnings. That implicates that we as humans are assets. And that's my disposition as a financial planner, is that you are your biggest asset. So nurture that capital that you have, that human capital. Hopefully it translates to greater financial capital as you're expanding your networks, which is the social capital aspect.
Right. So when I think about increasing your earnings potential, the notion is that if you earn more, I can save more for retirement and hopefully be able to fund my desired standard of living once I get to retirement. But in order to do that, what steps do people need to take, especially in the case that you just referenced, Black women earning almost 40 cents less than white men?
Yeah, that's where the numbers add up. Yes. And so one of the things particularly, and I keep coming back to financial planning because it has an element of strategy and coaching. When it comes to your human capital, you're really putting on the table what gifts, talents that you bring to the table, and what will the market pay for those talents. And so there are resources like salary.com, Paycheck City that will allow you to identify what your title is, what your responsibilities are, and as simple as saying, this is what I should earn on this bell curve for this particular position, and ensuring that your employer is aware that you know what your worth is and negotiate that.
Right. So this wealth gap also exists. It's true with respect to education, that even, at least in some cases, whites earn more than people of color, even with college education. Is that something that you've noticed in your research or your statistics, and if so, what can be done about sort of solving that problem?
So one of the things I really love that's happening now is baseline states. So let's just talk about equal access. So there are a lot of states now, over 20 states, that are requiring that high school students have at least one financial literacy education, right? So that means general access to basic fundamental education about personal finance. Hopefully that will continue to spark the interest and also the dedication for individuals to learn the basics of understanding high yield savings accounts yield better than regular savings accounts, that there can be conversations that are more open about money and strategies to take. I mean, if you think about in our country how wealth has transferred, I have to be honest, my ancestors were on balance sheets. They were assets that didn't belong to themselves, right? So if you think about the history and the decades, even centuries, right, of not knowing the best strategies, the people to talk to that will help you advance your knowledge and the opportunities to invest in homes that are not redlined, right, and interest rates, that there's not these disparities. So I think education is absolutely important, and access is even more important.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know some of the research has been done around generational wealth transfer, and that oftentimes housing is one of the assets that typically gets passed down, but that hasn't always been the case for people of color.
Well, actually, for people of color, when I think about some research, and it's been probably about a decade, Credit Suisse came out with a wonderful report that really indicated how Blacks really still focused on tangible property. So in terms of homes, that's probably one of the significant assets, and insurance as well, too. What we're seeing in transition with the way the retirement accounts are set up now, where there's not pensions, you're seeing more active engagement in trying to understand the market, because retirement assets are playing a significant role in ensuring comfortability in retirement as well. So I would love to see more research being done, more dollars to follow this evolution of Blacks being more exposed to the market through their retirement plans, and how that it has augmented their home as well in terms of living in comfortable retirement.
Yeah. I had the occasion to talk to a Black couple, and the father had said to me that when he was growing up, he didn't learn enough about investing. And so he's now getting late to the game in terms of investing in his 401k, et cetera, et cetera. But he doesn't want his children to grow up not knowing about money. And so he's placed a really high importance on them becoming financially literate, understanding how investments work and what risk is, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a feeling that his children will grow up and be financially astute in ways perhaps that he wasn't until he got older.
Right. And that's a baseline table talk, right? So if you were not getting this information in school and it wasn't available at home because your parents had no concept, right, you're starting way behind the starting line to retirement.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things I appreciate knowing, because I decided to focus in the area of financial, personal finance and investments, that by studying the ultra high net worth families, what they call the family offices, where people are serving them to help manage their wealth, they're doing financial literacy and education, too, as a part of the formal curriculum for their households.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, in essence, is how we should have this confidence in running our households, just like we are learning how businesses are operating. It's the same concepts: having goals, having resources, figuring how to make the most of what you have that's sustainable.
Right. So if you're in a household where maybe your parents don't know about money, and you're not in a high school or college system where they're teaching personal finance as a matter of course, what advice do you have for maybe young adults who are thinking about, well, I need to get a handle on investing and credit and savings, et cetera? Where do they begin?
Interesting you asked that question. So my daughter, she's 19, and of course I have drilled in her from the time that she learned how to count, right?
Even sooner, right?
What does money mean? And instead of using blocks, let's use actual dollars. As well too. She sent me a TikTok, and she was like, "Mom, is this person what she's saying about how you should set aside when you start working a Roth IRA?" And the interesting thing, I'm like, Karch, you have this. We talked about this. Yeah. You've already established up. And she followed my directions, but really didn't grasp about what it all meant for her, because I was just doing it, saying, you need to do this. She's like, okay, I'll do this. We'll do this. And so when going back to your question is, some people are frustrated, rightfully so, that there's a lot of misinformation out there about personal finance, but there's also some good information out there too that resonates with the audience, peer to peer. So in my case, my daughter, very astute. We've had these conversations, but it didn't really resonate until she saw a TikToker that really appealed to her.
I know that feeling. My daughter's the same way. But for her, even though she had a personal finance course in high school, and even though we talked about money a lot as she was growing up, it wasn't until she entered the workplace and then was exposed to sort of the financial wellness programs that are available in corporate America that it finally started to resonate. Where she said to me at one point, "I own a S&P 500, don't I?" I said, "You do, and have for a
Yeah,
while."
I know we don't get the credit as parents, but however it
I'm
comes
not going to take
together.
any credit for the sunshine or blame for the rain, Lazetta.
That's
That's
great,
my
Bob.
theory. Yeah.
That's great.
So we'll talk more then about this notion of intergenerational wealth transfer and what folks need to do in order to do it right.
And you gave another prime example about the father having the conversation with the son, and you having your conversation with your daughter, and me having the conversation with our daughter. Table talk, making it everyday conversations about what has gone well, not so well, what the opportunities are, what they mean. Encouraging other resources, whether it's Girl Scouts, they have programs now with where you can get your badge for understanding personal finance and the like. There's so many intentional ways, right, of making sure that you're having the conversation, you're sharing what your values are, giving room for your children to know what's important to them as well, too, and also what their responsibilities are. I'm thinking of now, particularly as we talk about retirement and even care, long-term care, right? People are not having conversations in advance about, is it going to be available? Will I have to take off work to take care of my parents? Do my parents have enough assets to do that? Should we have strategies to make sure we don't lose all the wealth, during this period of time? So living requires talking about money across generations.
Yeah. So we're going to take a short break, Lazetta,
Okay.
and when we come back, we'll pick up where we left off about the talk. Welcome back to Decoding Retirement. I'm talking with Lazetta Rainey Braxton, and we're going to pick up where we left off with one of my favorite topics. Lazetta, you and I in the past have talked about the talk, which is the talk that adult children need to have with their aging parents about a wide variety of things. And among the things that they need to talk about, well, let's talk about this notion that, first of all, it's often a taboo topic. So adult children are often reticent to have the talk. What are some strategies that at least we can get us started, and then we'll talk about what they need to talk about?
I'd like to focus on generations. And I'll start with baby boomers, even though silent generation, very much alive and well. I'm focusing now on baby boomers because they hold a lot of wealth that's going to be transferred to the millennials. And then we actually have silent generation, the baby boomers, Gen X, that's 3. We got millennials, we have Gen Z, and now we have Gen Alpha. So it's a lot of
Losing track,
generations.
yeah.
Yes, in terms of conversations. And even for me, my grandmother is still living. I have a daughter. So we're 4 generations. So as we're talking about the talk, it's so important for all generations. And I'll give you an example. With my grandmother, she is 90 years old, just turned 90. My mom is a caregiver for her. And then I support my mom as she's supporting my grandmother and making sure that she has the financial wherewithal to make sure my grandmother is good, while I'm still thinking about if my mom and dad are going to be okay, and if I'm going to be okay, and then my daughter's in college and taking care of her, right? And so when you don't have the benefit of having substantial wealth that is taking care of multiple generations, and there is a statistic that says wealth doesn't transfer past 3 generations, I'm talking 4 generations, that's a huge stretch, is you have to disclose about where everybody is, because if you don't know, then the risk of the unknown can be catastrophic.
Right. And oftentimes these talks happen when there's a crisis. So you really want to avoid that. You and I, when we've talked in the past about this, is this notion of having this talk in a caring perspective rather than something that might be viewed as an obligation. Talk more about that.
The approach, particularly for a younger generation to an older generation, is saying, hey, I'm an adult now. I want to do things right. Mom and dad, you've been successful, and frame it that way with, having a home that's nearly paid off or paid off and worked hard in your career, what are some of the things that you would have done differently or not differently, right? So in that way, it's not interrogating a parent. It's giving them the opportunity to be proud of what they've done, even if they haven't done all the things they really had desired to along the way.
So do you like having this conversation at Thanksgiving, for instance, or would you rather set aside a certain time to have that conversation?
Well,
or is it a series of conversations?
It's certainly a series of conversations. I really like the summertime because it's lots of sunshine. People are feeling great. It's Independence. It's Juneteenth. There's a lot of holidays that are uplifting. There's usually a lot of deaths during the fall, the winter time, and holidays where people are grieving and don't want to talk. And also Thanksgiving now, it's depending on the election year, could be pretty rough as well, too. So being strategic about the energy that's in the environment, energy, in terms of societal energy, where your family finds themselves in terms of their health and jobs. You got to be strategic with that because timing is everything. Because if you do it in a time where there's not a lot of energy, that could reset the conversation for decades.
Right. And to have this conversation, the adult child needs to have some education around what they're talking about, right? Like I think I just can't have a conversation about, hey, Mom, do you have a power of attorney for healthcare without knowing what the heck that is, right? I mean, is it fair to say that I need to sort of become informed myself before I can even start this conversation?
Oh, absolutely. It's very important. Or maybe not. Vulnerability is a good thing. It's just like I hear all this stuff talk about estate planning. Have you all done anything about that? That might put a parent on the spot, but at least it has a conversation going.
Okay.
What I do like as an example for those who may or may not be exposed, the more you know, the more fruitful the conversation can be. But I don't want it to be a hindrance because someone has to start it.
Right.
It doesn't have to be an expert. It just has to be someone with courage.
Right. So courage and maybe a little working knowledge of what a will is, what a healthcare proxy is, what a DNR might be, et cetera.
I think people actually know because life forces you to find these things out.
Right.
A lot of people have been in the hospital. When you're in the hospital admitted for any reason, you have to have a healthcare power of attorney. They're going to ask you that.
Right.
Do
you have
people
a HIPAA
haven't died.
release? Right.
Right. Have people died? So I think people conceptually know that there are documents that are necessary to be able to speak on someone's behalf, act on someone's behalf, and what to do when there's death in terms of access.
Yeah.
They may not know the specifics and who to go to or how to pay for it. So I don't want to say that as a society, we really don't know. I think as a society, we don't have the courage, we don't have the conversation partners, and we often don't have the resources to implement.
Right. Okay. So a real life challenge was, speaking about my father, who's now deceased, he hated talking about money. It was a taboo topic. And I remember once when he was somewhat ill, we had hired a geriatric care manager for him. And he was living in Florida. I was living in the Northeast, and I would go down and travel to see him occasionally to check in. And I'd say, how's the geriatric care manager doing? And he would say, well, I fired her.
Right.
And I said, why? And he said, well, she was asking too many questions about my money. And I thought, okay, that was the whole point of hiring this geriatric care manager. But so anyway, I guess the point is, how do we get the older generation who may view money as a taboo topic to open up about something that they just have never, ever talked about?
Well, I'm on the side of your father in that situation. Right, because it's a person that necessarily may or may not have built trust. Right? So you got a geriatric manager that's been assigned to a role and may have been set up for failure because the expectations weren't met.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying it's so important in terms of building relationships, having conversations so you know the trigger points and the glimmer points. The trigger points that shuts, a family member down, and the glimmer points that gives them comfort and trust to say it is safe to talk about these conversations. And it's so important to do it before things like dementia
Yeah.
since then, and it's too late to have those conversations.
Yeah. All right. So that brings me to this question of, you mentioned long-term care a little bit a second ago, and the notion of it costs a lot for long-term care, whether it's in home or nursing home or assisted living or continuing care retirement community. And we also know that many adults, 80% of them, 90%, want to age in place. And
Yeah.
oftentimes their homes aren't age friendly. So anyway, but that's a problem, right? We have to talk about this in the talk too. Like, how are we going to pay for long-term care, and where do you want to live?
It feels like a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
And I don't like zero-sum games. And what I mean by that is either you have the resources to self-fund, self-pay, or you've had the resources to subsidize self-funding, self-pay through insurance, long-term care insurance, or you spend down so you have no assets and you are looking for governmental support. Medicaid. And most people are not at the can afford the long-term care policy. And even now, because of the consolidation in the industry and the changes in health and underwriting, you have to start a policy now in your 40s, and you don't need it until your 80s. Now,
If you need it at all.
if you need it at all, right? And I don't disparage insurance. We all have to pay insurance on our homes, on our cars, which could be an entire lifetime. The affordability is a huge barrier for your everyday middle class family. So what are the alternatives? And that's why I say it's important to understand that human capital aspect. My mother and father are able to assist my grandmother because they are retired, right? And we have to be careful about the caregivers who also can fall ill
Burnout, et cetera.
from
Yeah.
burnout, et cetera. And then you're on to working generations that maybe don't have those leave policies, in place to be able to have a funded leave, even if they do have leave and the like. And it's a case-by-case basis with all of my clients about how they're navigating family support, community resources for the aging population who are unable to take care of their 2 ADLs, bathing, eating alone.
Right. So we have about 60 seconds left, Lazetta.
Yes.
So 2 questions in 30 seconds. One is, would someone need a third party, a financial advisor, to have these discussions between adult children and their parents? And also, what happens when conflicts arise between siblings as they're going through this discussion?
You don't have to have a financial planner, but I have heard from my clients it's very helpful to have a third party, unbiased mediator, sharing the facts, painting the picture for that conversation. And I have a lot of family meetings as such. And then your second question?
About family dynamics and when maybe conflicts arise.
When conflicts arise, someone has to be strong enough to diffuse them, to keep the agenda going. So hopefully that's you and me and our family and others have that, gifted person who knows how to diffuse conflict.
All right. Lazetta, I can't thank you enough for sharing all this knowledge and wisdom with us and our viewers and our listeners. Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Bob, thank you for having me and having these important conversations.
And now it's time for our segment that we call Ask Bob, where we answer a reader's question about personal finance and retirement. A question we recently received goes like this: what happens when I'm the beneficiary of a 401k plan and the account owner dies? And the answer, according to Ian Berger, an analyst with Ed Slott and Company, goes like this. As a 401k beneficiary, you will be able to choose from among several payment options for the account holder's funds. Those options, however, vary depending on whether you are a non-spouse or a spouse 401k beneficiary, and it's best to check with an IRA expert about which option is best for you. So that's it for this week's episode of Decoding Retirement. We hope we provided you with some actionable advice to help you better plan for or live in retirement. And don't forget, for the latest retirement news and expert advice, visit yahoofinance.com.